I worked on this story during my Adobe Creative residency, 2 women that were formerly incarcerated. And I remember this one woman told this story about how when she finally came back into civilian life, the only place she felt safe was in her bathroom, in her son's bathroom. And every morning she'd wake up at 3 or 4, whenever they'd wake them up when they were incarcerated. And she'd sit in the room because there was nothing around her. She felt safe and quiet. She'd sit there for hours. And I think about the fact that my practice as an image maker has helped me not only gain empathy, but just recognize like how little my own singular experience is not as important as our collective. And I just think about how important it is for the work we make to heal other people. And how much of a bummer it would be if I didn't photograph her properly, if my focus was off, if I didn't light her hair properly, or if I didn't know how to expose for her skin. The equity in this is not just because we want to take beautiful selfies. It's to make sure that our work shines for the people that are showing up to be in it. We are collaborative as image makers. So let's make sure this Black History Month that we challenge ourselves to see better, to listen better, to photograph better, and then to edit better. All of it works together to let other people know that our lens is a friend to them and to their story. How can I make a better set for people? So let's say you're used to photographing Black and brown folks, but maybe the sets you're building are bigger, larger. You have to hire people. You have to hire people that look like the people you're photographing. No one wants to walk into a place and feel like they're the only one of something. It'll not only put them on edge, but also make them question if people have their best interests at heart and have shared experience. I'm thinking about like times in the past where post George Floyd, I might have been maybe getting hired for something because people were excited just to say they worked with a Black photographer or director. And I'd point out some things on the deck that maybe didn't make sense or maybe a little stereotypical, or sharing that cultural competency sometimes is care, because it makes sure that the person after you doesn't have to deal with it as well. I always go back to my experience on United Shades with W. Kamau Bell. The directors on that show and Kamau too did an incredible job of hiring a diverse set of people, particularly as we were going to places to make sure our subjects felt reflected. So we were all the way in South Dakota learning about the land back movement. The people that they hired that were local had that experience. They could say, hey, this, we need to change this thing, or hey, maybe don't ask that question. And they also just did a lot of research. If we're not careful as image makers, as filmmakers, as image makers, as whatever we are, we can be extractive and not inclusive. And that can be dangerous because, yeah, we might make one great photo, but our practice as image makers is collaborative. So hiring people on set that have similar experiences to who you want to work with and maybe different experiences than you is not affirmative action or DEI. It's just smart. Secondly, it's really important to make sure that the light we're using is the appropriate temperature. Sometimes when we're photographing, we can end up with a light kind of like this one. Can you just turn to that, Sawyer? That's like a little bit warm. Or like the one we're actually using, which is closer to white. If we're not careful, we can accidentally end up with an image that might make our skin look warmer than it actually is. So making sure we photograph in RAW, we have a single light source so that we can change the temperature in Lightroom. Or if we don't have that option, making sure we use the masking tool to have precise edits to make sure that the warm is a little bit cooler and the cooler is a little bit warmer, to make sure everything is nice in the right skin tone. When you're photographing a skin tone that's different than yours, it's important that you understand what the skin tone looks like in even light. So when you're in mixed light like this, you don't accidentally expose too much for the dark or for the bright. That's really important, especially in America, because if we're being honest, the way that we still view beauty in this country is still very lighter skin focused. And if we are not smart about it, we can tell people, even with our images, that we don't think that them as a darker skinned person is beautiful. So as we're working on our exposures, it's important, whether it's through masking, whether it's through moving our subjects so that they're all in bright or all in dark, we have to make sure that what we're doing as photographers, we are intentional all the way throughout. Because if we're not, we could end up with images that are brighter than they need to be, darker than they need to be. Or in this case, in the darker side, this is probably closer to my skin tone, but my hair looks better over here. So that's where the magic of Lightroom comes in. When you're going through your edit, you have to make sure you have enough detail in your hair. If you don't have a hair light, which we do now, then you could end up accidentally having dark hair on a dark background and you lose all that. And that's not helpful, right? Equity starts with editing, but even before that in shooting, and even before that in paying attention to who we photograph and how we photograph them. Culturally, hair is very important for everybody, but for Black and brown folks, our hair is tells a lot of stories. I think about all of the weekends and the days my mom spent at the salon, spending time with her friends and getting her hair done in different ways. More fun ways, protective styles, different things that kind of reflected what she wanted to do in that moment. And think if she'd put all that work into her hair to then come down and get photographed and not have it lit properly, it's not pleasant. So something I do if I'm in a place where I can't photograph with a hair light is I use the masking tool and make sure that I go along the hair and bring the shadows up a little bit just to make sure we can see a little detail, right? Something that was really sinister about the early versions of portrait mode and those depth capture things is that because, once again, how cameras are made and who they're tested against, it would frequently cut it off a lot for Black folks this way. So people who had their really lovely hairstyles end up looking bald or just not great. And so I think it's important for us to challenge that as image makers, to be intentional enough to provide enough light to make sure all of someone's skin, hair, all of their being is properly exposed so they can be included and celebrated. Look at this detail in this model's hair. Look what happens when you photograph somebody with overhead light, being an overcast sun, and against a lighter colored background. You can see what her hair looks like. Look at this. She works hard to have her hair look this nice. Beautiful tendrils. It's just really, really lovely. So just make sure when you're photographing, you keep in mind what background you're using for your subject, and more importantly, that you have a hair light. And I wanted to bring up one more thing that I really, really love that's really helpful for you in your edits, and that's called versions. If you're having a hard time being indecisive in your edits, but more importantly, still figuring out how to edit skin tones, you can go into versions and make different versions of an edit. So let's call this test skin tone red. So now when we go to test skin tone red, go to our presets, we go to a preset that's red. When we go between, we can go from where we are and shift between the various edits we have. So actually, I apologize. I need to make the preset, to make the version after I apply the preset. So let's call this real skin tone red. So this is our original. This is our first one that brings our highlights up. And now this is our red. It's a little too contrasty, but now we can easily move between the different versions to understand better. Does this skin tone edit work for this person? Yeah, it's a lot of work, but getting it right, come on, I don't have to tell you how important that is. Remember how good it feels when you take an image of someone and they feel like you've captured them? Not necessarily them smiling, but like a glimpse into their soul. Part of that is this, the hard work of the edit, making sure that it's reflective of your vision and that person's humanity. So this is an example of a bad edit I did years ago. Let's go to the before. In the after, see how green I made her skin on accident? I was trying to desaturate these flowers and I wasn't really thrilled with it. So how do we fix that? Well, let's go over our new friend, the masking tool. Let's see if Select Subject does this well. It may or may not. Let's find out. Okay, so it got a little bit of the brush. The good news is I can, what does intersect mean? I can subtract from the selection simply by using the minus brush and just painting through to make sure that I'm not getting any of these flowers as I make my changes to this photo of Phoenicia. So you see that the red is what is being impacted and the white is not. So now we're in a good spot. Now let's go over to our edit. Like I said, it's a little green. And so we can just simply add a little pink and tint. So now let's look at our before and after. You see this? Let's look at it nice and close. This is our after. This is our before. You see how our skin just doesn't look right? And now just a little bit of pink works. Also, if you zoom in real close, you can actually see me taking the photo, which is wild. So looking at this, just even this simple little change can do a lot. So now we have a photo that we feel good about. Now, since we're already here, let's go ahead and make these highlights a little better. Let's bring our highlights down. Before and after starting to feel good, right? Let's bring our exposure up just a touch and then add a little bit of contrast. And now we have a little bit of like mystery woman through the clouds, through the flower, looking a lot cuter than we were steps ago. Don't believe me? If we go over to versions, we can see where we were just a minute ago. Green to full pink, a nice color. These things are attainable, but they require people, even me, a black person, being like, I need to do a better job here because I was being lazy. I slapped a preset on and I wasn't paying attention. Once again, with versions, you can reference different work that you've made and check through to figure out which is the best edit. And they stack on top of each other, so they're easy for you to find once you select on the image. And you can always go back through, use your adaptive presets, and let's say we just want to add a little bit to maybe make our eyes a little brighter. So we're going to zoom in. We're going to go to Enhance Eyes. And you see how it just adds a little bit of pop? You can bring it down, you can bring it up. But I'm constantly amazed at what Lightroom does. And so now we have this image that her eyes are popping, which is the key part of the image, the windows to the soul. Her skin looks right. And you can be enamored with her, the subject. The photographer's gotten out of the way at this point, which I think is a good sign. Okay, so let's say you made an incredible image. You just finished it in Lightroom. You want to put it out in the world. You're like, yo, bam. But first, you remember, oh man, I took a really cool BTS video. How can I match the edit with the video? Well, you can actually edit video in Lightroom. So you can take that sweet BTS video and give it the same treatment, that same preset, that same exposure, and export it so that everything looks the same and kind of has a little continuity to it. A little bit of your own cinematic universe. Happy shooting.